The Phaedo dialogue takes place in Socrates' jail cell on the day of his execution. He's been convicted of corrupting the youth and sentenced to die. His friends have gathered to pay respect and to question him about his laid-back attitude even as he prepares to take his poison. Socrates explains that his comfort in dying comes from his belief that when he leaves, his soul will survive and go to a better place. To him, death is simply the separation of the soul from the body, and since philosophers aren't supposed to be preoccupied with bodily pleasures, they should welcome this separation, since they've spent their life trying to free their mind as much as possible. If the goal is obtaining knowledge, which it is for a philosopher, then the body is an obstacle. When our soul tries to examine anything through the body, it's deceived by it. The body keeps us busy, filling us with wants, desires, fears, illusions, and other nonsense. And as we investigate through our body, these wants and fears creep into our thinking, preventing us from seeing the truth clearly. But free from the body, we have the chance to attain pure knowledge. And as a seeker of knowledge, Socrates is excited about the possibility of arriving somewhere after his death where he can acquire what he's been chasing after his whole life. His friends begin questioning the major underlying assumption to all this, that the soul is something that survives death. Imagine sitting on your deathbed and telling your friends that you're at peace with dying because you know you're headed to a better place, and one of them says, "I don't know, I think you might be toast." But Socrates loved reasoning to such an extent that he welcomed this kind of discussion, even if it opened up his comforting view of the afterlife to further examination. He starts out by mentioning a theory that all things come from their opposites. For example, something larger must have been smaller before. Between the opposites of larger and smaller, there are opposite processes of increasing and decreasing. And if these two processes didn't balance out, say if decreasing didn't balance out increasing, everything would just keep getting bigger and bigger. And since life and death are opposites, between these two states are the processes of dying and coming to life. If coming to life didn't balance out dying, then everything would be dead. This is clearly not the most convincing argument, but he's just getting warmed up. Next, Socrates turns to an idea that he's fond of, that all learning is actually just recollection. That there are these things that can't be precisely taught or demonstrated, yet we know they exist. He referred to these as the forms, things like equal, beautiful, good. Language fails around these big concepts. A parent can give their child many examples of good actions and make corrections when the child acts badly, but there's no one formal lesson they can give them to convey what it is to be good. In the same way, we can look at a sunset and know it's an example of beauty, but it doesn't fully describe it. And two sticks can look equal to the eye, but under a magnifying glass we can see that they differ. But even though no one ever adequately explains these large concepts to us, through these approximate examples we're able to gain the knowledge of them. According to Socrates, this means we must have had prior knowledge of the forms, which we're reminded of through experiences in life. But if we started seeing, hearing, and otherwise perceiving at birth, then this knowledge must have been acquired before then. His friends are convinced by this and agree that the soul existed prior to birth, but how can we be certain that it continues to exist after death? To answer this question, Socrates says we should examine what types of things are likely to scatter and what types of things aren't, and then decide which a soul is more like. He says there are two kinds of things: composites, things made up of parts, and non-composites, things that are irreducible. In this first category is where the visible, always changing human world lands. The latter category is where the invisible, unchanging forms exist. And he concludes that the soul is more like the non-composite category, and the body is more like the composite. His friends have some remaining concerns, which they try to hold back out of politeness, given his situation of staring down death, but Socrates encourages them to pipe up. Simmias wonders whether the soul could be like a harmony, and the body like an instrument in its strings. While a harmony is invisible and in that way similar to the world of forms, it stops existing when the instrument gets destroyed. Likewise, the same could be true of the soul when the body dies. And next, K-Base adds that while maybe the soul outlives the body, that still wouldn't mean that it's immortal. Maybe there's a finite number of lives that a soul has. And assuming that a soul is immortal because it outlives the body would be like assuming a man is immortal because he goes through many jackets in his life. In other words, what if this is Socrates' last set of orange prison robes? After pausing for a moment to pet his friend Phaedo, as one did in those days, Socrates begins his analysis of the harmony question by reminding everyone that they agreed with the recollection argument earlier in the conversation. And if you believe that the soul existed before birth, then it can't be a harmony. A harmony doesn't exist before the instruments that it arises from. Another implication is that a harmony isn't itself responsible for how it sounds. The instruments are being played and the music sounds the way it does based on those instruments. It's not the harmony's fault if the music is bad. And so if the soul is like a harmony, and if evil is like disharmony, then the soul couldn't be responsible for any evil within it. It would just be an innocent bystander in the actions of the body. But the logical continuation of this is that all souls would be equally good, which Socrates and his interlocutors agree clearly isn't the case. And unlike harmonies that simply arise from their instruments, souls are sometimes out of tune with bodily pressures. We don't just mindlessly follow urges, we have some ability to direct the body, to exercise self-control and discipline, whereas a harmony never sounds different than the instruments that produce it. To answer K-Base's cloak analogy, Socrates argued that nothing can admit its opposite while still remaining itself. For example, smallness can't become bigness while still remaining small. The smallness either gets destroyed or goes away at the approach of the bigness. This not only applies to opposites, but to things that contain opposites. One of the examples he gives is of fire and snow, which are not opposites themselves, but they each contain opposites. Fire always brings the form of heat along with it, and snow always brings the form of cold. If cold approaches, the fire can't allow it in while continuing to be fire. Likewise with the snow as heat approaches. In Socrates' argument, the soul is equated with life. It's what brings life to the body. When life's opposite approaches, the body dies, since death is the separation of the soul and the body. But since the soul is equated with life itself, it can't admit its opposite. And what doesn't admit death is indestructible. Therefore, according to Socrates, the soul is indestructible. After he finishes arguing, Socrates tells the group a myth about the afterlife that brings him comfort. When the guard brings him his poison, Socrates has the option to delay for a little bit before taking it, but since he doesn't resist death, it would be inconsistent for him to cling to a couple extra hours. After all, he spent his life training for this moment. As he put it earlier in the dialogue, the one aim of a philosophy practice is to prepare for dying and death. And now that the moment has come, Socrates shows what it looks like to meet death with courage, conviction, and his trademark curiosity.